Hello and welcome. I'm the Restless Kaiser.
I'm Johnny B.
And I'm Alex from Storm and Steel.
But together we are
Morning
for
Knowledge. Evening all. Before we get to Alex, let's have a quick catch up with the chat. Paul Parker is going to catch us in the rerun. Hello from the past, Paul. The head rat is here. I'm starting to paint now. It's about 8:30, so I should be able to focus on the show whilst I'm watching and highlight. You can't focus when you're highlighting, mate, or you'll get it wrong. Rich John is looking forward to this one. Yep, it's going to be a good one. Two grown men arguing, and only one of them can be wrong. Nick from Tinkler's Games is here. Head rat Alan is here. Hello there, my friend. Schwab Richard, good evening from Virginia. Well, hello there, our American friends. John Sowerby, good evening from Miami. Lazy Parrot Painting, good evening all. Rosie Raccoon is joining us, and Rich M. That's it.
Awesome.
Hobby-wise, I need to keep my energies together so I can argue with Alex about
Yeah,
everything.
man.
I'm gonna behave. I promise. He's a guest.
You say that.
I'm not doing
You
any
say that.
bullying. John.
We'll see. We'll see.
Whilst the adults talk like business, I'm going to paint some little miniatures, likely some Wood Elf Blood Bowl dudes, maybe some Romans. Who knows? I'm guessing, Alex, you haven't got anything on the table in front of you other than, insults that you can throw at Kaiser.
I have done recently, though, inspired by Alex, because I saw his beautiful fields.
True.
What was it? CrackCon last year.
CrackCon, yeah.
I've been making some 15 mil cultivated land. That's
Brilliant.
like Rich would call it.
Oh,
But
really good.
he's had beautiful details like greenhouses and cabbages growing, scarecrows. You're building yourself up. Right, before we get into the argument, Alex, could you let the beautiful viewers, although they should know who you are, can you let them know who you are and where they can find you on the Tinterwebs?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm Alex. As I think a lot of people in the chat I can see recognize them from my streams and stuff. I've got the Storm and Steel channel. If you just look for Storm and Steel Wargaming over on YouTube, you'll find it. And it's mostly historical, a bit of Star Wars, a little bit of Jewish Dread, a little bit of board gaming. But yeah, that's pretty much as much as you probably need to know. I'm very much a two fat lardies kind of guy, and yeah, that's what else can I say, really?
No, sounds legit. Sounds all right. There you go.
Storm of Steel on the YouTube, and a lot of your content, like you said, it's very Second World War and lardy games. You like lardy games, but recently you've been playing a bit of Undaunted with miniatures, though. I've been seeing that. That's a game I've been looking at.
Yeah,
enjoying it.
Actually, tonight, I'd literally about a couple of hours before this stream, I played and recorded a game of Undaunted, Stalingrad. First scenario, because I want to go through the campaign, so I've been playing it solo, and I thought if I'm playing it solo, I may as well record it. So I've recorded it, I edited it, and it literally had exported just before I came on the stream tonight. But so that'll be out, and I'm going to put it out. I'm just going to throw those ones out every so often. There's not going to be like a schedule or anything. I'll probably put it out next week sometime.
It's a really popular game.
Oh, it's terrific. Really, really good. My one regret with it is that I didn't buy it earlier. It is so good, honestly. When it came out, I defy anybody who likes any kind of board game or war game to play it and not like it. It's just such a really clever, really innovative game that has a lot of really nice mechanics in it. And the Stalingrad one is quite expensive, but for what you get for it, it's a huge. There's a vast amount of playability in it. And even so, you could pay 25 quid for the base game for the Normandy one, and that's a brilliant game as well.
Is that still only 25 quid?
Thereabouts. I think that's about as much as I paid for it.
Pretty cheap for a board game these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how they do it, and it's so well produced as well. It just looks great. It really
is. The box art is great, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking at this box because of the box art. Yeah, all right, okay. Other people have joined in. Andy, the Friends of General Haig, is here. You are not alone tonight, because Alex is a huge friend of General Haig. He has a miniature figurine of him under his pillow at night, I'm sure. Good evening from Poland. Absolutely, subs. You wouldn't want to face the dirty Bosch without your stick. Absolutely true. Tony Doubleday is here. John Hanlon, good afternoon from Denver. Plastics Evo pin and shields for my Carthaginians. Carthaginians, the underdogs of the ancient world, deserve to win. All that stuff about killing babies. Shh, don't tell them. It's all right. John Masters, first time on the stream. Well, welcome aboard. Hey man, not this guy again. I hope he's talking about me, not you, Alex. But we are both regular streamers. Alex Storm of Steel Making Channel. Storm of a Steel Making Channel. I'm missing the joke there. I'm sure it's in there. JP should be in a black and white striped shirt. Contestants ready. Gladiators, yes.
Sadiators.
Sadiators indeed. And Duncan FX 10-man Wargaming, who of course painted the beautiful Great Escape Games 12mm miniatures.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's that game we murdered.
That's the game we murdered. Absolutely.
1914, isn't it?
So wrong. You've had a look at those rules. I seem to remember you thought they're right. But have you seen the miniatures, Alex?
Yeah, they're lovely, aren't they?
They're beautiful.
Really, yeah. Really.
They're working at the moment on Russians and Austrians. Those are coming out soon. And I think next in line is someone they hope to do Serbians.
Right.
He wasn't in a huge rush because he didn't feel that there was like a lot of competition for 12mm Serbians out there in the wider market. But they are the forgotten story of the First World War.
Yeah, very much so. Especially this side of the wire, for sure. Yeah.
And then friend John Haig, showing himself to be a pro. Look, he's wearing his SS 143 t-shirt.
I'm actually wearing mine as well. I forgot to take my jumper off. I'm actually wearing it. Look. Don't know if you can see it. Right. Go on. So
before we get into the meat of it, just tell these amateurs what is SS 143. Because we're going to talk a lot about it later.
How long have you got?
Just tell them what it is, and then we'll get on with the main chat.
It's my favourite training pamphlet. Comes out February 1917. It redefines the British Army tactical stance from the Battle of the Somme. It's lessons learned from the Battle of the Somme, and it's pretty much the basis for modern tactical warfare. It's amazing. It's a right piece. So there you go. Have a shot there, Andy.
Yeah,
several shots.
So that's the stationery office, actually, isn't it? It's a HMSO, Magistracy Stationery Office publication. That's its pamphlet number, basically.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's the second critical document. Is that right? Before that, there's instructions for fighting platoons, and there's one for divisions.
Yeah, 135 is divisions.
Yeah.
There's also there's loads of them. There's the tank tactics. That's later. I can't remember the number for that one, but that's later. But yeah, so they're all around the same thing. They're just little booklets that are produced by the British staff generals for training purposes, basically.
Yeah, and this is the kind of so by this point we're going to call it. They've nailed down a formula. It's like, this is how you're going to do it. This is how this is why you've got this equipment you've been issued with. That isn't just a rifle and a bayonet, and this is how you're going to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the original ones are the FSR, which is the Field Service Regulations. Last ones prior to the First World War is 1909, and they're pretty modern in their way. I don't know if you want to get into the First World War stuff now, or if you want to chat about other things beforehand. I mean,
no, I think
let's a massive tangent, and then
let's not go on a massive tangent at the beginning. So the idea, the point about this evening is if we can, within 1 hour, our resident expert who studied under the great Gary Sheffield, who was president of the Western Front Association, and was really part of a real modern, deeper scholarship of the First World War, kind of inherited from John Terrain, who was a great historian, but he wasn't a modern academic historian. You know, he talked to people, and he read books, and he read manuals, but he didn't live in an archive and drill down into the minutiae in the way that modern historians do, where you can start to pull apart some of the ideas. But John Terraine really got the kind of interest in the First World War as a subject to history going again in popular imagination. Kind of Gary Sheffield is the man who took up that mantle and took it through, particularly the centenary, which I think was really important. The 2014 to 2018. That he was president in that period, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He was. I mean, unfortunately, he didn't appear on a lot of the TV shows and the programs that reached the general public. But I think with the First World War, I think the times are changing, and I think attitudes towards it are changing a little bit. And I think a lot of it has possibly come out of the centenary was good and bad in different ways. I think for the First World War, a lot of it was still the old tropes. Some of it
showing Blackadder, which is a great show. Themed in the First World War in terms of the costumery.
It's a satire, nothing else.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, you know, like you said, prior to John Terraine, I mean, the First World War really is a kind of it's lions led by donkeys, and that was because the Donkeys by Alan Clark is still a bestseller. Yeah, because he wants it as a bestseller. I mean, you know, it's nonsense. It was pretty much made up, and he wrote it specifically.
Do you want to know? I don't know whether you've ever looked. This is Alan Clark's The Donkeys. This is like the First World War mythology. This is the disgraced politician, Alan Clark. This is the preface. Starts with a lie. Ludendorff. These English soldiers fight like lions. Hoffman, which is his chief of staff. So, but we know that the alliance is led by donkeys. And he claims that he got this quote from Falkenhayn's memoirs. The problem is, Falkenhayn's memoirs are part of the public record. You can go and read them, and it's not in there.
No. No, apparently it was supposed to be said by one of the Germans, the Prussian staff, about the French in the Prussian War. And even then, it's probably a bit apocryphal anyway. It's probably nonsense.
He's attributed it to a widely accessible source.
Yeah,
memoirs, people read them.
Yeah.
Anyway, even the preface is a lie.
He was even told to calm me down by Basil Liddell-Hart, and even he hated Haig, and he told him to chill it out a little bit. Yeah, he literally sat down to write a bestseller to kickstart his writing career, and that's what he did.
Wow.
Right. So, think of it today. First War British Infantry tactics. We're saying infantry tactics. It's going to be all of the arms are involved, but that's kind of probably the nomenclature we're going to end up using, because when you talk about artillery tactics, you could talk for months about that, and artillery tactics is definitely part of it. But anyway, so we go into the war in 1914 with 6 divisions. Four of them are landed in France. The other 2 come later, or 3, and then
yes, I think so. There's a cavalry division, isn't there? The rest are infantry, and some stay behind, some go.
So this is a pretty substantial deployment for us. 150,000 men. It will grow to 250,000 within a matter of weeks. This is the army that lands in France. The problem with it is that the German army is 60 divisions or something. The French is like 59. We brought 4. But it was said of this army, some modern historians would debate, but it was the best equipped, best led, and best trained army that has ever left these shores. We'll start there, Alex. What are we saying? Is that a factual statement? Were these crack men?
Yeah, I mean they were professionals. You also had the territorials as well who came with them. I mean, at that point, these are people who wanted to be in the army. You know, a lot of them had served in the army for a long time. The general staff had served at least as far back as fighting in Africa, the Boer War. They'd all had active service in the Boer Wars. They'd had active service in Sudan as well. I mean, you know, they're different wars, but they're still learning their trade at that point as well. Anyway, and they are, you know, it's not like this army was just hatched in August of 1914. The later war, the army is, of course, where Kitchener's army joins up, but that doesn't happen very, very quickly. I mean, it's not a rush to the colours as it is popularly shown, there's a real slow drib drab of people coming in and joining the army early on. It's only after the battles of Mons and Le Cateau that where the British start to get pushed back, that then volunteers start to come forward in hundreds of thousands at that point. But before that, there's hardly anybody that joins up. They're struggling, really struggling. So yeah, I mean, it's a very professional army and retains that professionalism at least into 1915. I mean, British Army is quite small until 1915, when Kitchener's army finally arrives in France, having been trained. Because again, this is another thing about the First World War is they think popular perceptions. One of my particular interests of the war is that the soldiers just weren't trained before they went to fight, and they were the guys here, my local units, the Sheffield City Pals, they were training 7 miles away from me. They were training for at least 6 months. Then they went up and down the country, various other places. They were training there. Went out to, I think they were in Egypt for a while, guarding the Suez Canal, and then they end up
this kind of imperial reserve that they were forming in Egypt. With these,
absolutely,
we could do all kinds of different things. Let's get them all killed in Gallipoli and Salonika instead.
But
we've read forward to 1915 already, Alex. So if I can just roll you back, you want to get to the good stuff. I know. So in 1914, this army goes into France, and its fundamental problem. It's got a problem. Is it actually the main axis of the German advance is not where the French army thinks it's going to be, which is straight down the middle. They decide that they're going to march through Belgium, and they're going to use this huge right flank in what is misattributed, another story, what is usually labeled the Schlieffen Plan. We're going to shelve that conversation, Alex. But
call it that because that's what everyone knows it as.
That's what everyone knows it as, right? So this huge right hook is coming round, and the British are fundamentally in the way, and we're supposed the French have put us on the side to kind of keep us out of the way. Really, it's like we're going to fight the real war. The British get to watch. So this principle, I mean, so whereas there are 2 British corps, 3 or potentially 4 divisions, if you include the cavalry, there are 2 whole German armies marching, facing basically these 4 divisions, and they fight a series of rear guard battles. Would you broadly agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're falling back. I mean, Britain has always seen our defeats as victories. Look at Dunkirk. For God's sake. I mean,
very Dunkirk. This part of the story.
It's a retreat. It doesn't matter how you paint it. It's a retreat. Look at Singapore. But yeah, I mean, this is what's happening in France in 1914. That the British army are falling back in front of a massive German attack. The French, don't forget, the French are fighting as well in huge numbers, and they lose 1 million casualties in the first couple of months of the war. It's vast amounts of men are fighting.
The scale of this is just colossal.
In Britain, we just forget this stuff, completely.
But the French lose them in offensive operations, right? The French are attacking the Germans.
That's right.
In the center and the southern position. So it's a desperate to trying to keep the units together is the real problem, isn't it? That we can so easily be overwhelmed, surrounded, whatever, just from the scale of it, which is why to fight these battles. But that army that's sent there, these regulars and reservists who've signed up, this is this kind of 10 rounds rapid, trained to fight, in the Boer War and so forth. That army is kind of eaten up, right? Yeah,
for the most part, I would say I think a lot of it is very badly damaged, at least very badly mauled by the Germans. But the Germans also just run out of steam as well, and they are reversed by the French at the moment as well. So the French hold up the British side of things by stopping the German advance. As much as the much fabled 10 rounds rapid, the Germans think that the British are using machine guns when they're only firing rifles. Bollocks. Load of nonsense. They were using machine guns, it does get pretty badly knocked about. And as I say, this is kind of when you get the rush of volunteers coming in, because because the German army is on the ascendancy at that point, until the reverse of the Marne, and then things settle into basically an attempt to try to outflank one another, the Central Powers and the Allies, and that's literally the
race to the sea,
but it's an outflanking maneuver more than anything, or an attempt at an outflanking maneuver, and obviously then they just hit the sea, so they can't outflank each other at that point. So that's when we kind of settle into the trench warfare. I've never really got a really good answer about this. Even though I've done First World War archaeology in France and Belgium, we've found some very, very early 1914 trenches, German trenches outside Bixjotter in Belgium. I've never really had a satisfactory answer to how they went from literally from 3-man foxholes to that 500-mile long length of trench, and it must have happened at some point between September and December of 1914, but it kind of gets skipped over in a lot of books and a lot of
because everyone's exhausted. And
sounds like aliens to me. Alien intervention, I reckon. To be able to do it that quick.
But everyone's taking a breather in September, because you've got on paper, I've got a division there. When you look down at it and say 3 of those companies have got less than 50 men in that battalion. But this other battalion in the neighboring division is full strength, because it hasn't worked. So there's a huge amount of like reorganization, refilling of the ranks going on as the generals try and get an idea of what's actually the situation on the ground. Remember, this is, telephones is the high tech stuff. You've still got people going around counting men, writing chits of paper and sending them up to the next tier up, right, to work out what they're going to do.
Well, this is the thing.
Armies of millions.
Yeah, you mentioned this. I mean, communication is the real killer in the First World War. You mentioned it with the split of the divisions and things, and once you're out of sight of your neighbouring division, if you're not in touch with them, they may as well be on the moon, really. Yeah. At that point, because you can only issue orders by mouth. You haven't got wireless at that point, or at least you haven't got a mobile enough wireless system.
No, radios are on ships.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, telephones, you need miles of wire to bury and that has to be buried because it gets cut up by artillery. Yeah. And this is an issue that goes all the way through the First World War, compared to in the Second World War, where they've got at least mobile radios. I mean, even then, the radios are huge things.
They're in vehicles still.
Yeah, they're in vehicles, exactly. There's one man struggling along with his bloody thing on his back, poor fellow. Yeah. But yeah, so it's a real struggle all the way through the war with any kind of communication development.
But fundamentally, the War of 1914 is not. I'm reluctant to say this because this is a bit cliche, but it is probably a battle that Napoleon would recognize. The men are fighting in skirmish orders rather than forming up, but there are identifiable zones with identifiable units in pretty linear tactics. And this is one of the big changes that has to come in. Because the thing with the linear tactic in a skirmish line, you're fine from being shot at from the front, but from an angle, you're in a straight line. You're many men deep in that. And in the age of, high velocity bullets and machine guns, that's awful. Which is where the wire funnels you into those zones, right?
Yeah, it is. I think it is a little bit of a cliche. I mean, I'm going to pick you up on it, but because he would have recognized men with rifles, but whether he would have recognized similar tactics, I don't know. I mean, the thing with the machine guns is there's the people who like to bash the general staff and the GHQ and things. They always say, "Oh well, the British Army went to war with barely any machine guns." Well, they did.
Machine guns as the Germans per
yeah, exactly. Same amount. And also the thing is, as well, you've got to think when was the last war that Britain fought? It was the Boer War. What were they doing in the Boer War? They were attacking. Are machine guns good for attacking? No, they're good for defending, aren't they? So what you're doing is you're training off the stuff that you know. And in the Boer War, the machine guns were practically useless because they were fighting a guerrilla war. You know, it's like trying to fight the Viet Cong with Vickers machine guns. You're not going to do it. So this is why they're not front and center. Very quickly they become front and center because they realize how useful they are. And then
the big doctrinal difference, so this is a bit like the Panzers in 1940, is the perception of it versus the reality of it. So the British Army, 1914, there's 2 machine guns per battalion. For every 800 to 1,000 men, there's 2 machine guns. That doesn't feel like many for anyone who studied the World War II. In the German Army, there are 6 machine guns in a single company per regiment. There's 3 battalions, so it's the same. 3 German battalions would a German battalion would have 2 machine guns. The difference is the Germans keep them as a block of 6. So when they deploy that, they do sometimes portion them out. But the point is that there are occasions, and for offensive operations, putting your machine guns into batteries allows you to put down devastating fire in an area in a way that a pair or a single one isn't able to. So but we very quickly learn that, and we have machine gun battalions later with 60 odd machine guns firing over the heads of the troops.
Well, this is what, it's the formation of the machine gun corps, the MGC, in 1916. They literally take all the machine guns out of the battalions. But this is because you've got the development of the Lewis gun. So the Lewis gun is now the firepower, the sensor fire of the battalion, and then therefore the platoon and the company. So that's why they're able to group them together, and then they become more of an artillery bombardment weapon anyway. So like you said, they're firing over the top. They are also used to basically spray areas where there's known troop movements, to disrupt the enemy behind the lines and that kind of thing. So they'll be used, and there is footage, I think, I think it's in the Battle of the Somme film. Malins shoots footage of a machine gun firing, and he's basically they've got the thing just tipped back, and they're just firing and firing and firing and firing. And what they're doing is they're just spraying an area. They're not using this thing to fire across the ground. They're firing way over
1,200 yards away. There's just bullets raining down over a square mile.
You're not going to be moving about in that. It's not just artillery that's going off. It is things like that.
Yeah, and I think that the machine guns would often fire through the barrage.
Yeah.
Covering the space behind
it. And infantry tactics are incredibly important, but the First World War is definitely an artillery war.
John Terrain's book, they did the numbers. About 60% of the casualties in World War I was by artillery,
and the rest is anything else.
We've done the tangent thing, but anyway. So 1914, that army, that kind of highly trained, experienced army, gets really badly chewed up. 1915 is a really tough year for Britain until Kitchener, you mentioned. So this new volunteer army is raised, Kitchener's new army. And there's some lessons have been learned from the earlier part of the war. But what Britain hasn't done, and this is one of Gary Sheffield's really big things, is there isn't a proper system for distributing and sharing what has been learned and synthesizing it into doctrine. And that's kind of what starts to happen in 1915. So instead of recognizing, okay, so why did A company do better than B company? Let's talk to that captain. Let's find out, and let's share that elsewhere within the organization. But that needs to be done on an army-wide scale. And for an army that wasn't very big to start with, that mechanism starts to develop too. Would you say, Alex?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're writing reports all the time. This stuff is getting compiled all the time. Like you said, the SS, the stationary service start putting out these pamphlets of lessons learned. They're always looking back at what has happened, what worked, what didn't happen. 1915 is very much a learning year. The entire war is what used to be called a learning curve, but that's a bit too much of a straight line. It's a learning process. You kind of go up, you're down, you're up, you're down, and that's kind of how the war progresses. But it's always on a trajectory that is eventually going to go up. So you're always learning from previous.
The other guys adapting too, right? They get a vote, as it were.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Enemy always gets a vote, and the other side of the wire, they're doing their own sums as well and saying, well, let's look at this. And again, the German tactics completely changed throughout the war. from what they did, moving not from the forward slopes to the reverse slopes to individual strong points to, to
the elastic defense, which they get rid of because it's not tough enough for the Great War British offensives. Right. So that 1916 is the year of the Somme. This is what everybody knows. This is the Blackadder thing. So this is the year that we think we're going to win. We think we know what we're doing. And then on the first day of the Somme, if no people know anything about the First War, it's entirely coloured by one day. Which is the morning of the opening of the Battle of the Somme. I think one of the things that's very, very difficult to understand is how long was the barrage before? Was it 2 weeks?
It was a week.
It was a week. For a week, 1,000-odd guns have been firing at enemy positions near continuously. Guns that fire munitions as big as you. And they've been doing it for a week. If you would watch that, you would believe that everyone over there is dead. You would passionately believe that. It is astonishing the degree to which we you look now and said, walk over and we get machine gun to death. So we didn't think there was anybody there. They're all completely dead.
Exactly. I mean, this is the thing. You like you say, you would think that that's going to be enough. The problem is there's over 1 million shells fired. A lot of them are dud because they're still trying to work out how to manufacture shells properly so that they will explode. It's not until I think the 106 fuse comes in 1917, which is a Grays fuse, which is a lot better than the stuff they're using in 1916, which it really ups artillery as much as anything else. That is definitely one of, it's hard to say, the X is a war winner, but the 106 fuse is definitely up there.
It's a contender.
Yes, absolutely.
It's the Merlin engine of the First World War, right? It's one of the components.
Yeah. If it's not there, then it probably would have gone on longer. But so the bombardment before the Somme, because the way that it is fired as well. I mean, what happens is the French support the British because it's meant to be a French-British battle, but because of Verdun, the French give up most of their line, and then it becomes a British battle because at this point Britain is still a junior partner in the war. Haig is still following orders from French high command rather than himself. So
therefore, you heard it here first.
So the in the south part of the battle, went around MfA and Fricourt and places like that, there are huge successes on the first day because the German artillery just doesn't exist and the trenches are smashed up, the defenders are beaten, and the I can't remember which one it is. It might be King's Liverpool's. I think they suffered something like 3 casualties on that day
because there isn't anyone there. They are all
no one there. They capture their objectives. And the other thing as well is, the first day of the Somme is just myth bust it a little bit here. The idea that soldiers walked into machine gun fire. I've already seen a couple of comments in the chat here. Absolute nonsense. The 36th Irish Division, for example, they dug what were called Russian saps into no man's land. They crawled through these. They're basically just below the ground. They crawled through these. They'd laid out in no man's land. It was high grass because obviously it had not been cut down. It was the middle of summer, of course, so you got a lot of growth. They laid down in the grass, waited for the British bombardment to lift, or at least the moment it was going to, and they ran at the German trenches, captured them. They actually lost men in the bombardment because they got there so fast. So these are not people just walking in lines, and they captured those trenches. The problem is the units either side of them just couldn't hold their flanks, so they had to retreat after that. But they got into their objective trenches. And as I say, down in the south, huge successes, and that's where the point of the battle went after that, because that's where it was being won. And arguably, the Somme is a success, whether people like that or not.
You said there was long grass. I thought long grass hadn't been invented back then, because when you watch the documentaries, it's just mud and holes.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. It was raining as well. It was raining all the way,
especially in June, July. Yeah,
it's weird. It's like this weird microclimate that it started raining in August of 1914 and didn't stop till November of 1918. It was just literally mud and rain.
That's an interesting. This is about popular memory that you talked about before, though, right? Because it's conflating two different battles, two very important battles. Is in 1917 we have a series of battles which are broadly remembered as Passchendaele, and that eventually starts to grind to a halt because the conditions are so mud-soaked. Because it's in Belgium, all of the dikes and stuff, the water is like 6 inches below the ground. As soon as you start blowing this stuff up, there's just liquid everywhere.
Yeah.
But that's a year later in a totally different part of the country.
Also, you've got to remember, during Passchendaele, during Passchendaele, it wasn't just mud. There was also a heat wave, and it actually dried and then the problem became dust. It wasn't actually mud. It was dust. It was so dusty. But to close that bit off, the point with Passchendaele is the reason that a lot of people think of the First World War as being Passchendaele and the mud and things is because that is the most photographed battle.
Yeah,
and the pictures that you see and that is literally because that is when the official photographers were on the ground taking photos, and there was just lots and lots of photographs of mud. So you don't see anything from very little from the first day of the Somme, where it was bright sunlight. It was middle of summer. It was a
glorious summer's day by all accounts.
It rained the day before, but it was just it soon passed. And as I say, halfway through Passchendaele, there's a heat wave and it suddenly
all dries out for a while.
Storm as well, but you don't see that. And also that's because that's not how we see the First World War. So that's why when you see a documentary, it always shows you the same pictures of the guys with a stretcher struggling through the mud. It's like that happened.
And the horse is sinking in the horse gas mask, because it's a repugnant image, right?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, and then war is. I mean, it's awful. Of course, all war is awful, and in any conditions you're fighting it. But the thing, like you mentioned about the high water table in Belgium, they alleviated the problems there with digging their trenches shallower, so they built breastworks instead of digging.
And that's a British position from the whole. So again, when you see these kind of iconic trenches with the duck boards at the bottom and the I don't know what you call it, the thing to hold back the soil. Actually, for most of the British positions, they're actually above ground. They're parapets.
Yeah.
Because you can't dig.
That's right. It's breastwork.
Water.
But in France and on the Somme is chalk. It's got drainage, so you can dig a nice deep 6 foot deep trench, and quite happily. And again, having done battlefield archaeology, I know what it's like when it pisses it down in France. When you're digging a trench out, you get mucky, but it's full of water because it's
well drained.
Drains away.
It's not until 1916 the British Army is down there, right?
No, that's true anyway. Yes, I mean they don't take over the areas of the Somme till 16 anyway.
Till Verdun.
Yeah, pretty much.
So with 1916 Somme, we've got our plan for victory. I think we haven't mentioned it. You might pick up the gist of it. The first day of the Somme is horrific. I get the numbers, something like 20,000 dead, 38,000 wounded. Horrific. Day 2 is nothing like that. Day 2 is less than 10% that number. So you want to talk about them learning quickly. They learn very quickly that what they had done yesterday didn't work so well. We need to narrow this right down to the bits that are working.
Exactly.
I don't know what else a commander is supposed to do. We're going to press where it's working.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to stop where it's not working. But then after and during this period, there's a huge amount of kind of evaluation of what's gone on. And we get this document you've referred to. So we get this formation of, and it's really interesting because if you're interested in the Second World War or even modern infantry tactics, you can see it all in this document. You can see this is the birth of modern fighting methods for small units. So are you able to talk us through what the substance of this document?
Yeah, 100%. Let me just add a little bit more to that about the Somme. I mean, you said the second day is nothing like the first. Absolutely, by 14th of July, which is very important because that's my birthday. But 14th of July is the Battle of Bazentin Ridge. And this is a completely different battle to what had happened 2 weeks before. They attacked just before dawn. It's called, a dawn attack. So they attack just before the light breaks, take the Germans completely by surprise. They're using rolling barrages. They're completely different tactics. And again, it's a huge, huge victory compared to what had happened 2 weeks before. So it just shows you how quickly that, these are issues and they're problems in their men's lives. Of course they are, but they are learning how to fight and they're learning their trade even on the ground. And this, remember, the Somme is also the first time the Kitchener's armies fought. So these are people who were volunteered 2 years previous. These are just your office clerks and anybody who joined up in that initial.
This is like the new army you mentioned earlier.
These are civilians. This is the first time the British Army is populated by civilians, and they're learning it like that, But yeah, SS-143.
So these are the tactics we're going to use from late 16, early 17, and beyond. Is that right?
Yeah. So really, what happens is I was thinking about this because obviously I knew I was coming on here, and I was just been thinking about it the last couple of weeks, and I think overall the Lewis gun is probably the biggest change. The revolution of military affairs within the First World War. Now it's impossible to say that this is a war-winning weapon because, again, these things never are they really at all? Like, yes,
we're going to come to this.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Because what happens with the Lewis gun is, like we've already said, you're basically getting rid of the big heavy machine guns because they're immobile. You put them together, turn them into an artillery thing, just leave them off. But the Lewis gun then allows you to have firepower that is mobile, and it also then allows you to have a command structure which goes from battalion prior to 16 pretty much right down to platoon, which is where SS-143 comes in. Because it's about
the Lewis gun, because you might not know what it is, but you've probably seen one in movies. It looks like a drain pipe with a drum on it.
Yeah, brilliant.
And it's kind of it's very portable. It's air cooled, which really keeps the weight down. Well, the big barrel around most machine guns that you recognize, Maxim gun, it's not a barrel. That's a jacket of water that weighs several kilos. It's like half a stone or something. Wow. And indeed, the Germans don't develop an air-cooled light machine gun. They just have a smaller water jacket on. It's the same machine gun with a smaller water jacket. But the Lewis gun is air-cooled, which is a game changer in terms of its portability. One man can operate a Lewis gun.
Absolutely. I mean, it's called a light machine gun, but my God, if you've ever picked one of those things up, it's chunky to carry those things. But yeah, it is far more portable than the Maxim gun. And it completely changes the ability of a platoon to create its own firepower. And this is what happens with SS-143. Basically, the sections that go to war in a platoon. So basically, you have 4 sections. And these are made up, I think it's something like 12 riflemen in the initial part in 1914. And Louis just asked as heavy as a bread, about 3 times heavier, man. Yeah. Honestly, they're huge things. And then you've got to carry all the ammo for it as well, but it is still more portable than the Vickers. So you have 4 sections. Each, I think, 12 men, isn't it? Commanded by a corporal.
Something of that order, and a command group of 4 or 6 guys. Yeah,
they're all armed with rifles. Then in 1915, the what we know as the grenade, the Mills bomb, is produced as well in mass numbers. That is also converted into a rifle grenade as well, so it can be fired further. But you also have men trained to throw bombs. There's a bit of a cult of the bomb that starts to come up in 1915. Too many people are using it and throwing it about and stuff, so they could try to bring this back a little bit, but it gets integrated into the platoon. And during the Somme, they start to develop the tactics that we know as SS-143, which goes on into 1917. And this basically, what you do is you take a platoon, it has 4 sections, you split those 4 sections into rifles, bombers, which are the grenadiers. The grenadier guards didn't like them being called grenadiers, so they called them bombers.
Yeah.
rifle grenadiers, and then also the Lewis section. And each one of these is 8 men strong, commanded by a corporal, and then you have a lieutenant and a sergeant above that, and a couple of scouts and runners and things like that as well. So what you've got, if you think about it, 12 men in a section is quite a lot of people to be commanding. 8 men is a lot easier. So, you're doing this by voice anyway. We've already talked about it. Command and control is a real issue in the First World War. So you've got to be able to tell the men what they're doing, and you've got to be close to them. So 8 men is a lot easier to control than 12 men. Doesn't sound like it, but, just making that change really changes the difference in how you're able to operate on the battlefield.
And these NCOs at that level are going to be new.
Yes, absolutely.
The old army, that when the survivors who were corporals, lance corporals, sergeants, they've moved way up the ranks.
They're up.
They're all captains now.
Absolutely, yeah.
From the casualties. So
they are leading, yeah.
Your corporals and your lance corporals in 1916, 17, they'd not been in the army probably that long. They're probably not pre-war soldiers. They might have been pre-war rankers, if you're lucky.
But what you got with our separation of the different, basically, specialists within the platoon. So if you're attacking a trench or say a strong point, you have your Lewis gun off to one flank. They're laying fire down. They're covering fire. You have your rifle grenadiers. That's your localized artillery. So they're at the back somewhere as well, firing, over the heads of everybody else, and they are also keeping the enemy's heads down. Meanwhile, you have your rifles and your bombers getting around the flank of whatever it is you're attacking, and then they will move in from the flank and finish off, basically. So you've got, it is just modern
combined arms element.
Yes, combined arms element.
I've got artillery, I've got an assault group, I've got a holding section.
And that's, it's made up of 30, 40 men, basically, under the leadership of a junior officer, an NCOs.
I think if I may, one of the things, as gamers, we get really fixated on the kind of equipment, and the late war, World War I British Army is really easy to do. It's like one base is bombers, one base is rifles, one is rifle grenades, one is and I might even be playing in a system where they're still all basically the same in terms of their effectiveness, but I've modeled them that way. But I think a key part of this document, which is so easy to overlook when you fixate on the weapons, is that every soldier knows what his job is. Instructions for platoons in the attack.
Yep.
If you're a bomber, your job is to get in a hole near the trench and throw bombs into it. It's like it's telling you, not just giving you the equipment, but it's telling you what to do with it. Because the officer was probably some kind of clerical officer in a factory 2 years ago. He's not a soldier either, not a lieutenant.
This is the thing as well. General Maxey is the big guy on training in the First World War in the British Army, and he's a great general. He's fantastic, really indomitable kind of guy. And he, his maxim is train teacher to train Tommy, and it's all about training. It's all about putting these things into place, and this is why the SS 143 in particular is so important, because, like you say, literally it goes step by step. This is what you do. This is when you are doing this. This is where you are on the battlefield. This is how you proceed. This is your next step, and then from this you go to here, and they're going to go to here. And it's it's such you could read that as a modern soldier and be able to follow it very simply, because it is very similar to what modern soldiers do nowadays.
Did that not become a detriment, as in the enemy would have been able to establish, exactly what each player's doing on the attack? Did the Germans go, hang on a minute, there's seeing a pattern here, so let's counter it?
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? The enemy has always got a vote in this.
As you said, yeah.
Yes and no. I mean, the Germans obviously changed their tactics, their defensive tactics against this kind of thing. But what happens is, it's already kind of been mentioned about the Losstruppen, but the Germans draw together what we would know as the stormtrooper, and they're using similar tactics to this, where they're storming forward. However, what they do is they draw off the best men from across the army and put them into these small cadres, which then take huge casualties. So what you're doing is you're actually thinning out the best men of the army, whereas the British army, they give it to everybody. So everybody things. So you've got, the idea is not, instead of just having everybody who's really good in one place and all getting killed at once, everybody across the entire board knows how to do it. The Germans are, it's an arms race. Everything is an arms race.
The German tactics, which isn't really the main topic, they're much simpler, and they're much more brutal. A huge problem the Germans don't have at the beginning, but once we get wind of it, a bit like Montgomery does in the later part of the Normandy campaign, when the Germans lose ground, they ruthlessly counterattack. They are like, and in the First World War, certainly in the early stage, that's a very good idea, because the other guy is disorganized, totally out of command and control. If you're going to get this trench back now is the easiest time to get it. So you scrape together whatever you can, you counterattack, but they do it really recklessly. And when we start really getting going with our offensives, it isn't the men that get killed when we storm the trenches. It's actually the shock divisions that then counterattack get murdered.
Yeah,
because they've rearranged. They operate what they call the elastic defense, and actually, again, kind of a lot of military history stuff that they stopped doing it because it wasn't working, because it's much more like modern tactics. Rather than having these big lines of trenches full of men, they start pulling them out and to try and break up the attack and then counterattack it. But what's happening, because of it, probably partly down to the firepower and the improved tactics of the British offensives, is it doesn't work. They lose a lot of men and they don't recapture the ground, so they go back to linear tactics.
Trying
to put up that solid wall to stop you in the first place.
Sorry, apologies.
It's all right.
No, this is the discussion, right? History.
The other thing to say, I mean, that is very important about SS-143, as I mentioned it as well, is the fact that it goes from command is no longer a battalion. It's the man on the spot. I mean, this is something that's in Field Service Regulations 1909 anyway, man on the spot thinking. The British Army have always had this. The man on the spot is the man who knows what's happening. So he is the one who should make decisions. But that generally, in FSR 1909, it's mainly, a higher level, an officer, whereas when we're in SS-143, we're talking corporals are now making these decisions.
Yeah,
a lieutenant is laying out how this attack is going to go in. So it's a far more, it's a development of command all the way down to the level that, again, would be recognisable today in the modern British Army or any other army, really.
You think that's achievable because of the high level of training and because of the clarity of role? And that corporal knows exactly what he is supposed to do.
Yeah.
When his officer is dead and junior officers die like flies in the First World War, he knows what the plan was. And he knows what everybody around and his sergeant, they all know what they were supposed to be doing because it's so clearly defined.
And it's proven because in April 1917, it's the Battle of Vimy Ridge. It's the Canadian Corps attacked Vimy Ridge, supported by British artillery, supported by British aircraft, supported by British generals, supported by British divisions. But, it's a Canadian victory.
On Vimy Ridge, the Canadians done that. It is the biggest war memorial in the world. It is enormous.
It's a beautiful thing. But you can see when you're standing up on the top of Vimy Ridge, you can see why it was such an important feature, because you just see all of the German lines laid out ahead of you. But SS-143 is published in February 17. Vimy Ridge, the attack goes in April of 17. They use SS-143 and just sweep through the Germans. It revolutionizes the war at that point. It's not that they are Canadians, it's that they've been training for 2 months using these tactics. The problem is what happens later in the war, and Jonathan Both wrote a really good book about this, about Third Army in 1918, called Winning and Losing on the Western Front. The problem is later in the war, they just don't have time to train because things are moving so fast. Also, because again of the nature of the war, it's about artillery. You've still got to use artillery to move forward. So you've got to bring artillery forward every time you move forward. And what do you need to bring artillery forward? You need roads. Who's around to make roads? Soldiers. What should they be doing? Training. No, they're making roads. They're bringing stuff forward. They're taking casualties back. They're just not being trained. So there is a breakdown. I mean, although you've got this great pamphlet and these great ideas pushed by Maxi to train everybody all the time, the circumstances of the war just won't allow it. So there are instances where even like in 1918, there are mass casualties because they aren't trained properly in this fighting. But that said, you still get this vast development of firepower from the platoon level. So it starts off with one Lewis gun, basically in SS-143. By 18, there's at least 2, sometimes 3, 4 Lewis guns in the platoon. So that amount of firepower that you're putting down just increases, 2, 3, 4-fold, and it's a wall of fire. So it's really helpful, but you've still got to be trained to be able to do this stuff. You can always, but you can find examples of how it goes right. You can find examples of how it goes wrong quite easily, both sides of it.
And there's no shortage of incompetent officers, right, during the course of the war. But it is not a bevy of bumbling fools who never learn it.
No, far from it. I mean, these are people that again, I said it before. Haig wasn't hatched in 1914. He's had a military career up till this point. They all have. They've all gone through some kind of military situational awareness. They know what they're doing. They're just having to learn a new way of doing what they already knew. That's what the First World War is. The 1918. British Army is at the vanguard of it's by far again probably the most professional army in the field. As it was in 1914. It's come back again full circle, and because of these reasons, really.
So a couple of things that you touched on, just to go in a bit more detail, and because this is again a very strong feature of the Second World War. You mentioned that thing about firepower. So what happens to all the belligerents during the course of the war is the rifle strength of the divisions drops drastically, but the firepower doesn't. So what happens is you lose 4,000 men because you lose a brigade or whatever, but then you get an extra 30 cannon and an extra 60 machine guns that go into that. And one of the things that really changes is as a formation takes casualties, its firepower does not significantly decrease. If you've got an 8-man team with 3 Lewis guns and 2 guys die, they've still got all those Lewis guns. There's less people carrying bullets. But unlike in bolt action, when the gunner dies, another guy uses the machine gun, right? That's what it's all about. Same with the trench mortars that right down at company level, all of those other assets. As you take casualties, men within that section of other men can take those weapons on board and use them because they've been trained together. So the firepower is able to be sustained despite horrific casualties. Again, not relying on the rifle and bayonet to do your killing.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, in 1918, the British Army has to go to basically a triangle formation.
Yeah.
So instead of having 4 battalions, you drop into in a brigade, you drop down to 3. So you're losing, a quarter of the manpower. But as you say, the vast amount of automatic weapons that are now in that are far more increased. The firepower is far more increased than it was in 1914. And this is another thing as well. I mean, the Australians and the Canadians, they retain the square formation, so they have just got more men, and they've also got that firepower on top of stuff. So this is why, when people say, "Oh, the Australians and the Canadians are the most successful," it's just literally numbers. It's counting.
Yeah. So the other thing you touched on there, because I listened to a WFA lecture on this one not long ago, is you touched upon the working party thing. So And I don't remember the exact numbers, but if you think about these trenches, right, there's this trench system that goes from Switzerland to about 400 miles.
Yeah, 400 or 500 miles thereabouts.
400 or 500 miles of trench. It is not just one trench, it's many layers deep. Yeah. It's miles deep because there's other series of trenches further back and in camps beyond that, and roads and rail track and all that wire. There's a lot of civil engineering going on, vast scales of it. And I think a division in 1914, which is like 25,000 guys, has got one company of engineers in it. The Canadians specifically get labor battalions attached at a very low level. Their labor is completely separate. But so to maintain all of this infrastructure, which is constantly being shelled, the British soldier spends something like a third of his time on the front in a working party. He's repairing wire, he's building runners, whatever. Your Canadian soldier is never doing that. The Canadian soldier is there to soldier.
Yeah.
So he's got a lot more time for training.
Absolutely, yes. I mean,
this is rotating men out of the line all the time. We think we've got all this time for training. Said no, because something like half the battalion on any given day is on a working party.
This is what they say. They euphemistically call it rest and recreation, I think, R&R, but it certainly isn't, because they're still doing stuff. Like you said, they're repairing roads, they're bringing stores forward, they're taking stores back from the front lines, you know, moving casualties around. There's always work to be done.
Labor.
Labor. You got to bring guns forward. You've got to, you know, prepare the positions for the guns before they come forward. It's just a continual drive.
Car out of a ditch. What there's just work for men to do, right?
Course, yeah.
When every man in the society is in the army.
Absolutely.
There's no one left to fix anything that used to be the blacksmith or whatever.
Absolutely.
So, well, because it's come up as a question, you know, the Second World War stuff, and because you're called Storm of Steel, so German tactics, we touched upon it a little bit. The German tactics, the stormtrooper tactics, they're definitely different, and they're much bigger. They have their units, because I read, is it Goodmanson who wrote the book, The Stormtrooper Tactics?
Yes, he did, yeah.
Great book for a war gamer who wants to know how many of these and those they had. Great book, talks about them. But they tend to be Sturmabteilung or storm battalions, ordered to be created by creaming off the best men, as Alex said. But these are the men who would otherwise be your corporals and your sergeants. So you're you know, the kind of guy that teaches the new guy how to do it, and this is how you put your bedroll together. All that stuff, that you've taken them all out. But they tend to be in weapons companies, and they're like a trench mortar company, a flamer company, rather than a platoon. And it's done rather at the expense of the quality of the overall army. This British tactic is every soldier is having this training. The Germans are specializing in it. And if you want to get an indication of how desperate things are for Germans in Germany in 1918, the stormtrooper, the key attraction for the role as a soldier is it's dangerous work, but you get a double ration. You literally get twice as much food.
Wow.
You give a well-fed, healthy soldier twice as much food, he just gets fat. Right? You know, that sounds attractive, but if you actually need a double ration, that means this other guy isn't eating enough. If these are supposed to be soldiering, right? And I think it's a really telling thing, that like the idea of giving the soldier a double ration. Well, they're obviously not eating well enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you know, Germany's on starvation rations by 1918 anyway. I mean, it's one of the known things that when they attack in the Kaiserschlacht in March of 18, a lot of it breaks down because they go raiding the British and French food stores, you know, because they just haven't eaten. You know, some of that's probably bits of myth, but I'm fairly sure there's quite a lot of truth in it. You know, if you're eating drinking Erstadt's coffee and things like that, it's
maybe chicory and acorns.
Exactly. Yeah. These well-stocked stores, you want a bit of it, don't you? Of course.
Yeah. But there is a very famous memoir about Germany in the First World War called Storm of Steel by, I think he was a stormtrooper in the end, wasn't he? Ernst Junger, German stormtrooper. And it's nowadays it probably seen more as an anti-war thing, but I'm not sure it necessarily was at the time.
No,
but it's very gritty. It's stuff like pissing into the machine gun water collector condenser because they didn't have any water to cool the machine guns down with and stuff. It's very real in that respect.
Yeah, it's
a soldier.
It's very different to a lot of the other memoirs of the First World War, or of a lot of the literature to the First World War, because he is very unapologetic about the viciousness of the fighting and rolling it in it. And it starts with him in the army. It doesn't even start with his training. It starts with him getting to the front lines. The first time he takes combat, and it ends with the armistice. And that's it. It's very much this.
There's no growing up on the farm.
This is my war. Yeah, exactly. And it was praised by the Nazis as well in the Second World War, but he really didn't. Yeah, he really didn't like that. He didn't follow there. He did become part of the German army in the Second World War. He was given a promotion and stuff. I've kind of saddled myself with the name a little bit because I used it for my blog about 12 years ago, and I've unfortunately not been able to shift it. But I like the book. I think it's a good, interesting book because I'm more interested in the First World War aspect of it, because it is you can't unfortunately you can't expect what other people do with a piece of literature. You can't.
No, the Nazi stole bits from everyone's ideas.
Exactly.
But in terms of its development, without going into the Blitzkrieg conversation, that the stormtroop tactics that are developed in the First War, I think it's Ludendorff says that every German soldier must be trained as a stormtrooper, but the war's already lost for Germany by that point, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean,
it's too late, but those same they're dispersed tactics, high levels of firepower, very independent, low level command. It's the same lesson. It's the lesson everyone is learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, this is like I said, to go back to SS-143. It's the stuff that has been taught in a doctrinal sense. It's there. It's written down, and that is just kind of where the development comes from. The Germans in the Second World War, they put a big emphasis on firepower at the platoon level with the MG 34s and 42s. Very much so, a nice light
fire and maneuver.
Lots and lots, fire and maneuver. So these things all come from the First World War, and it's from the lessons that the Germans are learning as well. And obviously, of course, they're going to be looking at how the enemy fights as well, and what they can do to counter that also as well.
Do you agree with the historic perspective that the Spanish flu epidemic caused First World War I to end sooner? I think Alex, what's the phrase about the main enemy and the main? Go on, you tell them.
What do you mean? No, you tell me.
What was won by the British, where we fought the main enemy in the main?
Oh yes, we fought the main enemy on the main front of the war, which was the Western Front. The British Army won. Were in the vanguard of that victory. The German army was defeated in the field. They signed the armistice. Got nothing to do with the pandemic. Pandemic kicks in after the war. It's starting in 1918, but it really kicks in after the war.
Europe is very vulnerable to it.
I don't know where that's come from.
Yeah,
it's a military victory, absolutely military victory all over. The Battle of Amiens, 8th of August 1918. It's combined arms from the British Army all the way through. It goes straight into the 100 days and absolute defeat of the German army in the field. It's 4 years.
100 days is 100 battles and 100 victories in 100 days.
Absolutely.
It is a relentless advance. It's like, we have got this now.
The only reason
we've got them beaten.
The only reason it stops is because Germany asked everybody to stop.
Yeah,
it's literally they're like, we are beaten. They crossed the Ouse-Sambre Canal on the 4th of November 1918. It's when Wilfred Owen is killed, but they are crossing.
Yeah, really tragic days before the end of the war, right? Like a week or something.
Yeah. Apparently, his parents got his telegram on the day of the armistice or something.
Right.
You know, he was in the thick of the fighting. He was urging his men on. He was last seen as they were crossing the canal. But once they broke that, they broke the German lines. It was an open line to the gun lines from that point. The Germans were just continually on the retreat for that last week. There was nothing left.
Any idea that the German army was not beaten in 1918 is just Nazi bullshit. There isn't a drop of historical evidence for it. We all wanted the war to end. It ended before we went to Germany because the Germans gave up.
I mean, they were making plans.
We were going to get there, but we didn't want to pay the blood price for it if we didn't have to. Why would we? They're ready to give up now, right?
Well, this is the thing. This is the point. When people talk about a Napoleonic style of warfare in the First World War, it's more really about the politicking side of it, because the generals fought the German army, the British and French generals fought the German army to a standstill. They beat them, and then that was it. The war was over. Now it was time for the politics to take over. And this is how wars were fought in the 19th century. You didn't march into somebody's capital and occupy all of their land. You made them sit down and write a peace treaty, and then you march into their capital. You know,
have a victory parade in their capital afterwards by agreement. Franco-Prussian War, for example.
Yes, exactly.
The German Empire is born in the Palace of Versailles. We're going to do this in your country, mate. Peace treaty.
But this is what, this is still the thinking behind what happens on the 11th of November. It's right. The Germans are now ready to sign an armistice. They're ready to end the war. So that lesson is very quickly learned, and you'll see what happens 20 or 30 years later when the Soviets roll over everything, because they just don't want the Germans to do what they did again in 1939. It's like, right, this time we will.
The whole German surrender thing, I mean, the degree to which the German military did not wish to accept it. The guy who signed the armistice is shot. He's murdered in the woods. Randomly. There's a great bit. There's in I can't remember whose account it was. It was some kind of journalist type account. So it just had all the sensational bits in it. But there's a brilliant moment when they're negotiating, and it's like, about the German ships that are going to surrender. The thing is, the Royal Navy doesn't know exactly what the Germans have got, so they ask for something like 210 submarines, and the Royal Navy guy thinks this is a lot to ask, but I'm gonna ask because that's what we want. And the Germans don't have that many submarines, and he's very worried about this, so he just crosses it out and writes all. Hands it back.
That covers everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I can't surrender that many because we haven't got that many left. Alex, it's been great having you on this. There's so many more things we could talk about, and it'd be great to sort of drill down into one of these actions at some point. Maybe if you'd be willing to give a presentation for the viewers on, like you mentioned, this particular area in the Somme, which, to many people that's just a story they will not have heard. We're going well.
Have more chats on. I could talk about the First World War till the cows come home if you want.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know John wants to go to bed. It's been great chatting. Oh, it's good. We didn't argue because we stayed off things like strategy for those that know. Alex,
did well.
Both First World War enthusiasts. We have very different views about how the war should have been fought. So when it's sending out the potential for disagreement. Alex, I think I'm right in saying you're a firm believer in the whole Western Front focus.
Oh, yes.
We have to fight the Germans where the war is, and we've got to beat them, and that's the only way we're going to win.
Absolutely.
I believe Germany surrendered much. She starved to death, and I believe she's going to do that whether we had a million casualties or not. Well, Royal Navy did it, but that's my view. It's not Alex's.
It's too late for an argument, but I'm just going to say, we didn't know.
Wrong.
You can only go with the information that you're given, and hindsight is a wonderful thing. But
yeah. But I'm a sailor at heart. You see,
we almost made it.
Well, the thing is, actually, the British way of war until at least 1915, and all the way from the Elizabethan period, is about the navy. It's about having a strong navy and then bankrolling somebody else to do fighting for you.
Yes.
It's what happened at Waterloo. It's what happened.
How we beat Napoleon.
And it's what Britain tried to do in the First World War, but then France and but France and Russia said,
"Wait, blow the whistle, but this isn't a whistle."
Yeah, but that we weren't going to talk about that because there'd just be and Alex knows more than I do, so you know I'm ultimately going to lose. I'm not going to put myself up for that kind of public humiliation. Anyway, guys, it's been a pleasure. We were due to have this last week for various reasons. We had to cancel that. I'm sorry about that.
We're trying to do it in August, haven't we? I think.
Sorry, we talked about this way back in August. Yeah. Next week we've got Harry from Fog of War. We're going to talk about what's coming. As always, we're going to talk about Flames of War, Battlefront stuff. The new sort of Berlin 1945 Soviet stuff is coming out. There's things to talk about there, and we've got next month. We've got Discourse. We've got the guy from. He runs a podcast about World War II naval history. His name's Seth, and he's the director of Camp Shelby's museum. And so we're gonna do something about the war in the Pacific. I will put links out to his podcast and so forth. I'm hoping I can persuade him to sort of give us Guadalcanal in a nutshell, but I don't know whether you can squeeze that into an hour.
This is Guadalcanal in a nutshell. In a nutshell.
So that's what we got coming up. So thank you for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.